Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm here with my co-host, Karen.
Hey, Tess.
Hey,
how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Just fine. It is like bitter, bitter cold in Wisconsin, which is, I call that writing weather. Actually, the whole season, all of winter is writing weather for me.
Yeah, that's kind of the same here. It's like rainy and dark, and there are a lot of Pacific Northwest writers. And I always think it's because the weather is so terrible. Like, what else could we do? We stayed inside and read all of our childhood, and then now we're all in our little offices writing in the dark.
And then do you find when you have a really nice day and you can hear people outside?
Oh.
Like my office is in the front of the house. I'll see people walking their dogs and kids playing on their driveways. And I'm like, like everyone's having fun but me. So I almost have to be like laser focused during the nice weather.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I can see him walking by my window here. And although I don't know if it's like this where you are, probably with you guys have severe weather, but for us, we have so many drizzly days that anytime the sun comes out, even if it's like 30 degrees, everybody's out because it's like little moles looking up out of the, the darkness.
I wish our listeners could see you doing your impression of a mole popping its head up.
Well, once we have our YouTube channel, the listeners will be able to enjoy that.
Bite your tongues. That is never going to happen. Oh, man.
Yeah. Anyway, well, we are excited because we had an amazing guest today. I actually had not read her books before we interviewed her, but I wish I had known about them when my kids were smaller. But I think that they would enjoy them even now at 15 and 18.
Well, yeah, because her target audience is middle grade, which is, I think she said she had kids as young as 5 that were reading the books or being read by their parents. And the readership goes all the way up to age 12. So that's quite a span.
Yeah.
And I'm about halfway through reading the first one. I enjoyed it, and I'm much older than 12.
Right.
So I think it's kind of a general interest. Especially I loved it's set in Harlem, and you really get a feel for the neighborhood and what it's like for people who live in the city. And being a suburbanite, I really liked that.
Yeah, that would be really fun. I can remember as a kid, I grew up in this small rural town, and reading about anybody who lived in the city was just completely fascinating to me. And I just thought it was so romantic and glamorous and everything. So it's neat to find books like that.
I remember that too. And it just seemed more exciting. It's like they had a fire escape they could go out on, or they, things that never happened in the suburbs.
Exactly.
I mean,
and definitely not on Wild Park Lane. That's where I grew up. That's
is that where you
for
grew
real.
up?
That's the name of it. Yeah.
Oh, I grew up on 122nd Street, so not nearly as picturesque.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the stories that Karina told us was about the first time she met Amy Poehler. And I loved hearing that. As authors, we always think, what if one of our books was made into a movie? And so we got to live a little bit vicariously through her. And she told it in such an entertaining way. I think listeners are going to love hearing that.
Yeah, just hearing her tell the story, you can see why she's a good writer. Because I could picture the whole scene. Yeah, and it's like we all have daydreams of meeting somebody famous that we really admire, and she got to do that. So we got to live vicariously, as you said. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
Hello. Today we're very excited about our guest, Karina Yan Glaser. She's the author of the Vanderbeeker middle grade series, the first of which is titled The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street. She grew up in Illinois and California, and when she was young, her favorite place in the whole entire world was New York City. She ended up going to college in New York and never moved away. She now lives in Harlem with her husband, 2 daughters, and an assortment of rescue animals. Karina's books have been translated into 12 languages and have been optioned for film by Amy Poehler. One of Karina's proudest achievements is raising 2 kids who can't go anywhere without a book. And that is a crowning achievement. I wish I could say. Out of 3, I've got 1 avid reader and 1 sort of reader, but 2 for 2 is excellent.
Yes,
So-
it sort of felt like my job as a mom is complete.
Yes,
Yes.
you did well. So, Karina, tell us about your path to publication. I understand it had something to do with a dare.
Oh, yeah. So, well, I've always loved to write, especially when I was younger, and I've always loved to read. And I think, like most people, like that freedom to read sort of dwindles a little bit in high school and college. You're so busy with schoolwork and extracurriculars, and so I started reading a lot again right after college, and then I had my children, and that was a complete joy because I could revisit all these books that I loved when I was younger. And when I had my first daughter, I started a blog. Remember those? And I would just sort of document what it was like being a new mom, especially being a new mom in New York City, which is a unique thing in itself. And sort of the perils of, a stroller on rush hour subway trains, or trying to take my kids to the public pool, and you had to shower off like most regulations require you to shower off before you enter a public pool, but this public pool didn't have a shower, but it did have sprinklers at the playground next door. So we had to run in our bathing suits, like on a busy street to the sprinklers and wash down there and then go back. It's like very busy here. So it was very embarrassing, especially not for my kids, but for me, like walking around in a bathing suit on the sidewalk. And so I would just document those things and just post photos, like new moms do, to share with family. And my husband's uncle really loved the blog, and he's not like super open with his emotions. So it was just, I got a phone call out of the blue. He's never called me before, and he called and he was like, I just thought I'd tell you that I really like your blog, and I read it every morning, even before I read the news, which is a big thing for him. And I just wanted to let you know. I don't remember. I think someone told him, like, maybe you should call Karina and let her know you like it so much. And so he did. And then we went to visit them one year, and he said, you know what? You really should write a book. And I just sort of laughed it off. And he said, no, really, I think you should write a book, and I dare you to write a book. And so I was like, okay. And it just gave me something to think about. So I went home, thought about it. And then my kids were, one daughter at that time was starting kindergarten, and the other one was in preschool 3 days a week in the morning. So it just gave me something to wonder about. Now I had, 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, all to myself. And what was I going to do with that? And so I looked up a writing class in the area, and then while my daughter was in preschool, I would run to the local coffee shop, write, and then dash back and pick her up. And that's how the Vanderbeekers started.
Wow, that's a wonderful story. The coffee shop reminds me of J.K. Rowling.
Oh, yeah.
Must be something about Kid Lit where you work best when there's a lot of bustle around you.
Well, and I can certainly relate to the daughter in kindergarten and one in preschool, and you're thinking, oh, I have this time now. And it almost makes you more efficient because
Yes.
okay, they're coming home at whatever time. I got to really focus. So yeah, I was the same way. So I'm curious about the series idea. Did you know from the start that that's what you wanted to do, or did that kind of morph into a series?
It started with just one book. Actually, when we got the offer for the first Vanderbeekers book, it came with a second book. So the 2-book deal, but it wasn't going to be like a second book in the series. It was going to be another standalone. So we took that offer. And then when I was close to being done working with my editor on book 1, she emailed and asked, what about a second Vanderbeekers book? And I was sort of almost done with the standalone book. So I was a little bit reticent to say yes to that because I knew if I did another Vanderbeekers book, the second middle grade book I was working on wouldn't see the light of day for a while. And it was also like a really quick timeline for the second book because instead of having, a year to 2 years to write it, it was like write it a lot faster. So I did end up doing the second book. And then when I was doing the second book, they emailed and asked for a third book. And so I just kept on going like that. So after the third book, they wanted 2 more books. And then we thought it was actually like a 4th Vanderbeekers book and another standalone. So we said yes. And then we found out they wanted another Vanderbeekers book instead. So we had to negotiate that. There was a lot of like miscommunication, I think, and trying to figure out like who wanted what and when. And then I was also trying to like get that second middle grade book out. But the publisher really wanted, that firm schedule of 1 Vanderbeekers book a year, always in the fall. So fans knew what to expect, which I totally understood. So that's how it came about. And when they ended up asking for that 5th book, I'd always thought of the Vanderbeekers as an arc of 4 books, because the first book starts in the winter, the second book starts in the summer, the third book starts in the spring. The last one I thought was going to start in the fall, and that was going to be like all the seasons. It was just like a nice tidy package. I felt like the overall arc of the series sort of ended on book 4. And then when we decided on 5, it just sort of threw me in a tailspin, because all of a sudden I had to figure out 3 more books or another book. And then I didn't want to just tag it on as an afterthought, which really annoys me about series sometimes, where they just wrote the last one because the publisher wanted it and there wasn't really inspiration behind it. So when I was on tour with my 3rd book and trying to figure out the 5th book in my head, I thought, well, the only way I can write a 5th book is if I have another story arc that sort of blends in with the series. And I can't do that in 1 book. I would have to do that in a few books. So that's how it got to 7. So then we had to go back after like sort of arguing about the 5th one and be like, actually, could you add 2 more to that? So it's just, so awkward. But it's part of like that process of really owning yourself as a writer and knowing what's going to work and letting other people push you to be better, but also trying to figure out what works best for you and just like letting yourself be pushed, but also pushing back too and trying to figure out what's best, not just for you, but for the series. And so that's how I got to 7. And that's how also my standalone middle grade, the first, that's original second book, got pushed to actually this April. So in a couple months, it'll finally come out after so many years of working on that one. I think it's so much simpler for so many other people where they, I know a lot of authors who just go to the publisher and say, I want to write 5 books in this series, buy all 5 right now. Whereas mine has sort of just been like piece by piece and going back and forth a little bit.
But I really admire that you sort of figured out what worked best for you and what worked best for the story. Because what I think a lot of people don't realize is, there's the writing, the creative side, and then the business side.
Mm-hmm.
But the creative side is affected by the business side. So if
Yes.
you've got a deadline or somebody wants to steer you in a certain direction, that can mess with the creativity. And it seems like you really had a handle on that and asserted yourself so that it would be best for the readers. Because now you've got kids that are totally invested in the story, and you don't want to let them down.
I mean, I was definitely lucky because I have a very great agent. She's actually taught me a lot, because in general, I think that I am a people pleaser. I want to do what will make other people happy. And she is very much into empowering me to make decisions that work for me in my life. And, like everyone's life, your lives, people who are listening, like there are so many things that come up with your kids or people getting sick, just family things that have to be dealt with. And it can really interrupt the writing or the creative side. So I think having her support and her advocating is very helpful. And my editor is also amazing. She's always been very into like, best. We support you. And that is really great to have in a team. And I also, do work really hard to give them what they want when they need it, try to be ahead of my deadlines, be respectful of their time. And I think it comes back, it comes back full circle.
Now, the series is set in Harlem, which is where you live, and the Vanderbeeker family has a rabbit, a dog, and a cat. And we know you love animals, and you have several pets as well. How much overlap or how much of your fiction blends over from your life?
Well, the pets were definitely just taken right from my life. when I was writing the first book, we had a dog, a cat, and a rabbit. And yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of people think of New York City as maybe, I mean, we just don't have the space for a lot of animals, right? But it doesn't, for me at least, it didn't really seem to affect my decisions around that. When I was young, I always wanted a house full of animals. So now I can actually make that happen. And we made it happen. Like our rabbit was a house rabbit, and she just hopped around the living room and chewed on our books and chewed on everything in our living room. And, you know, we had our dog and we had our cat, and definitely, you know, the animals, at least for me, you know, when I was writing the book, it felt like, you know, you get to those points when you're writing and you're like, I don't know what to write. I don't know what's going to happen next. I'm just sort of stuck. And the animals always provided me with something to write about, especially since it was so close to me. And even if I knew it wasn't going to end up in the story, I think my editor cut out like almost all my references to pets because there were so many in the first book. Like it probably was like twice as long as it was. And she was like, do we really need this whole scene about Franz? And I'm like, I think so. I don't know. She's like, I don't think that's part of the plot. Like maybe it doesn't advance your story very much. And I'm like, I guess we could take it out. So I've gotten a lot better about that. But I noticed that I do use that as a way to just keep on writing, because I think part of the writing process is not stopping. Like even when you feel like you don't have anything to say or anything to write, like even if you know you're going to delete it later, sometimes just continuing to write and not feeling that pressure, like this has to be perfect and has to end up in the book. And if it's not perfect, I'm not going to write it, because then you just get stuck. I think all of us would. So for me, the animals were sort of like a way to continue the story, knowing that it would be deleted, but at least it would get me to the next plot point.
I think for a lot of us, the first book, you feel like you have to include like so many things.
That's true.
And then as you're going along, you're like, oh, there will be other books. I don't have to have everything in one story.
Yeah,
That's
especially like
so
that first
true.
chapter.
Yes.
You feel like you have to explain so much. And then you read other books and you're like, this person explaining too much. And then you're like, okay, I could
Yeah, I know
pare
where they're
back. We don't have to do all of that.
Yeah, I know. One of the advice I heard early on was that, you know, don't underestimate how smart your readers are. Like you don't have to spell everything out for them. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's true.
I noticed music comes up a lot too, both
Mhm.
in the Vanderbeekers and then in the book you have coming out in April. Is that from your own life as well?
Well, I am not musical.
Really?
I am not, no, but my brother played the violin all through when I was growing up. I was more into sports. But my daughter, actually both of my daughters played instruments growing up. My younger daughter is more into sports, so she sort of transitioned out of music. But my older daughter really loves music so much. She loves all sorts of music. Like, you know how Spotify has those like year-end stats, and like the amount of music she listened to was incredible. And the genres too was like all over the map. Like she doesn't really have a genre that she doesn't listen to. So it's really interesting to see her appreciate music so much. But because they both started when they were very young, like my older daughter started at age 4, at least the way that we did it, the parents are very involved in the beginning, especially. I've attended every single lesson she's ever had, and I take notes for her. I sometimes videotape things for her. And because of that, I feel like I'm very lucky to have that musical education. I didn't have that growing up. So it was like a real gift for me to sort of understand music more and appreciate, especially classical music, which I think can be hard to understand if you don't have some background. So she's great. She is in a youth symphony in New York City. Her favorite thing in the whole entire year to do is go to like this chamber music camp. And it's just wonderful that she loves it. And they're just all these young musicians and they just love their instruments, and it's great. So definitely she's inspired the character in the Vanderbeekers, who is very musical. And, you know, along with that is sort of the pressure. I think, you know, being good at something at such a young age, you get that pressure of like having to perform well all the time. And so I try to add that into the books too, like that feeling of ups and downs. Yeah, because I see that in her life, and I know that's really common especially, kids these days, they put a lot of pressure on themselves. There's a lot of external pressure from the world to be perfect or to succeed or be great at something at such an early age. And so I think in a way, it's almost me processing sort of what she goes through through the characters.
Amy Poehler's production company optioned the rights to the first book. Yay. How did that come about?
Well, that was pretty incredible. So at that time, my film agent had sort of talked to various people about making it into some kind of film or television show. And actually, Amy Poehler ended up finding the Vanderbeekers on her own at her kids' book fair, school book fair. And she read it to them out loud. And after she read it, she called my agency, or her assistant called the agency and just was like, we just wanted to let you know it's such a great book. And Amy read it to her kids, really loved it, and just wanted to share that so you can share that with Karina. And the person who took the phone call said, by the way, the option rights are available. And a week later, she called and asked about optioning it. And it was pretty funny because I was in Michigan at the time when all this happened, because I was doing a really awesome gathering of book lovers, teachers, authors in Michigan, and it's called Nerd Camp. And it's just amazing. It's like the best thing ever, where just teachers and librarians all over the country, they caravan it over to this little town in Michigan, and just we do workshops. We do things with kids, and it's really fun. Anyways, I was there, and the reception wasn't so great. And I got an email from Amy herself saying, I'm so excited about this. And can you meet me tomorrow in New York City at 3:00? And my flight was like coming in at 1:00 the next day. And I was like, I can totally do this. So I wrote this email back, said, yes, I would love that. And I pressed send, and it wouldn't go through because we were in the middle of nowhere.
Of course.
And it was just like no reception. And I was walking around with like my phone up and trying to like just get it sent. So after like a couple hours, it went through, and I got my flight home and ran over to the place I was meeting her. And it was like, I don't know, you can't see how I'm dressed, but it's very minimal. Like it's very like jeans, t-shirt, sneakers, and I'm short, I'm Asian. So I like go to this designated spot, which is like a very swanky area of New York City, where it's like all models and tall people. And I go up to like the reception area, and the desk is so high, like I could barely like see over it. And like the people behind the desk, they must have been on a platform because they were just like looking down on me. And I was like, I'm here to meet Amy Poehler. And they just thought it was a joke or something. And I was like, I have a text from her right here. And they're like, we're going to check on this. And so I'm just like standing there, and all these like giant thin people are just passing by me. And I'm just like standing there feeling so stupid. I had like a backpack. And they call up, and she's like, yeah, send her up. And so they're like, I guess you can go up. I was like, thank you. So I don't know. It was all sort of like surreal. But Amy was great. She's so down to earth. She's very, very kind. She's very thoughtful. She had really thought through how her vision would come to life doing this. And since then, I saw her again when she was filming Moxie, another book she brought to screen on Netflix. And I was in LA for school visits, and I reached out to her, and she's like, yeah, come on set. And so, yeah, it was awesome. I got to go on set. I got a little badge. It was very exciting, and got to spend time with her and the team that she wanted to work on, the Vanderbeekers. So it was very wonderful because I was a huge fan of her before. My kids were a huge fan. So it was great. Very surreal.
So did she option the rights for the whole series or just the first book?
So in the option agreement, she can use anything from any of the books.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Now, as a writer for kids, are there things that you keep in mind when you're writing? Like, for instance, I'm halfway through the first book, and I noticed that you use words like melancholy and finesse, and the books are intended for ages 7 to 11 or 12. So obviously you don't hold back on vocabulary, but are there other things you keep in mind as you're writing?
Well, I mean, we talked about this earlier, but Tess, you were saying we don't want to dumb down our writing, or we don't want to underestimate the reader, right? So I try not to do that. I try to have a lot of respect for kids, because even if they don't know what the word melancholy is, maybe they'll understand it from, how I've written the rest of the paragraph or where we are in the story. And maybe that's a word that will come up again for them later, and they'll remember that they've heard that word before. It's sort of like, why do we read books to babies? Like, they don't know all these words, right? But just the act of the language is important. And both my kids were very early readers. And I think one of the things we struggled with was finding books that they enjoyed reading that didn't have content that was too mature. So they had very good vocabulary early on, but a lot of books that have a lot of great words and more sophisticated themes also had very mature content, which obviously, you don't want like younger kids being exposed to mature content before they're ready for it and before parents are ready to talk about it, right? So I wanted to write them books that they would like to read that had a range of ages, because a lot of kids like to read about older kids. So, a family is doing a read aloud of the Vanderbeekers and they have a whole range of children. Hopefully that's a book that they can read that everyone will enjoy, and that, the older kid won't feel like this book is too simple, and the younger kids don't feel like this is way beyond what I can understand. So that's sort of the mix I was trying to go for. And, when I was younger reading books, like, I didn't understand a lot of the words I was reading. Like, it didn't really matter, I don't think. And now, there are tools if there are kids who really do need to know every single word. There are Kindles where you can click on the word and it'll give you a definition right there. And they have dictionaries. So if it's a kid who really needs to know what every single word is, I'm sure they can figure it out.
That's one of my favorite features on Kindle, is the look up the word.
Yeah,
so handy. It is. And I was reading a book the other day and I was like, I can't believe how many words I've had to look up that I don't know exactly what the meaning is. What kind of questions do you get from your readers?
Well, I get a lot of fan mail, which is really nice because I love letters, and I answer every single one, because I know that even though for the author it's a lot of work to respond, I do think it is so special if you're a writer and you take that time to write. Because, when I think about it, like, for me to respond to someone, it probably takes like 10% of the time that it did for that person to write to me. Like, writing a letter is a lot of work, especially when you're young. When I was younger, I wrote a lot of letters, but I think now it's just like, it's not quite as ingrained in our culture to write letters. And so there's a lot of work that goes into it. And so I want to respect that and respect the time that kids put into thinking about it. And I know that they're probably checking their mailbox. I know I did when I was younger. If I wrote a letter to someone, like, it's the excitement of getting a letter. So I do respond to everyone. There's a handful of questions that every author gets, right? Like, what's your inspiration? What gave you the idea? But I do get some questions that are, one of them is, which character do you relate to the most? That's always an interesting one. Some questions I get, like, why did you make this happen in the book? So a whole range of questions. I get a lot of questions from kids who are writing books themselves about what to do when you run out of ideas, that kind of thing. So it's pretty awesome to get fan mail and just letters from readers. It's fun to see how they connect to the story.
I understand that there is a fictitious bakery in your book that's part of an actual map, and the map is real, but the bakery is not, and that there have been readers that went looking for it and were disappointed when they couldn't find it.
Yes, I feel terrible about that. I mean, the thing is that I can see how that's confusing, because the layout of the map is entirely accurate. The streets are all there as they are in real life. And then there are a lot of real places on there, like City College is exactly where it is on the map. The post office is exactly where it is on the map. But then there's a lot that's made up. So I was doing a school visit with a school in Harlem, which was just the most fantastic experience, to talk to kids in Harlem who read the book. And in preparation for my visit, they went out like on a scavenger hunt to find all the locations. And they didn't tell me that first, otherwise I would have warned them. But I felt horrible because I have all these photos that they sent me of like them like looking very confused, like pointing to a section of the street and being like, shouldn't the bakery be here? Or, I just felt awful. And then there was this one picture where they found like a coffee shop. It wasn't the coffee shop in the book, and it wasn't in that same location, but they all like stood in front of the coffee shop to take a group photo. And then the owner of the coffee shop came out because he was like, why are these kids taking a photo in front? And they explained to him why they were there. And then he like got in the picture too. But yeah, I do feel bad about that.
So as a reader, when you were a child, did you have favorite books when you were a kid?
Oh yes, I was like that kid who read with the book under the table at the dinner table while eating and staying up late with the flashlight. My kids are like that too, which now it's like a little annoying because I'm like, you really need to go to sleep really late. But I loved so many books. I mean, one of the books I loved was The Babysitters Club, which has had like a resurgence now with the Netflix show and graphic novels. It's awesome. And it's nice to be able to talk about The Babysitters Club with kids now because they're like all excited about it. But, you know, back then when I was reading it, maybe you two were fans of Babysitters Club too. But one of the things I loved about the story was that there was a variety of characters, and there was an Asian American character, which was very rare. It was very rare, especially for such a popular series, to have that type of representation. And she wasn't like sort of that stereotypical Asian character. She, you know, she was artistic. She wasn't good at school. She's very fashion forward. You know, all those things that was really important to someone who grew up in schools where there were no other Asian Americans, and where, you know, you sort of get labeled immediately as a certain type of person. And those books were enormously helpful to me, and I just loved them. And then I loved all the New York City books, like you said in the intro, from The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. I love that book. One of my favorites was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I just loved Francie Nolan. She's like my hero. And I gave that book to my daughter to read, my older daughter. And I was like, if you don't like it, don't say a word to me because I love this book so much, and you're not allowed to criticize it in front of me. Talk to your friends about it. But yeah, all those New York City books definitely gave me this idea of what kind of life I wanted to build for myself when I grew up, and also gave me something to aspire to and work to. And I think that's really important, especially I think for teens, to look beyond, you know, what is right now, and maybe give yourself something to aspire to and to work for. And that really helped me get through teenage years.
What does a writing day look like for you? Do you have a regular routine?
I do not. I know there are some people who say, you know, you need to write every day, you need to have a schedule. And I don't. I mean, everything is so topsy-turvy with the pandemic. You know, how having kids is just like, you never know if they're going to be in school or they're going virtual, or you need to take them for a COVID test, or and we have pets. Sometimes, you know, that sort of makes the day go haywire. There's no typical day. I think, at least now that I've gone through so many cycles of the book process, I sort of know what to expect in terms of, okay, this is a time I need to set aside just for drafting. So I need to get all my other stuff done so I can just focus this month on drafting. And then other times, you know, it's reviewing copy edits, and that takes a different type of focus. So I feel like I've gotten pretty good at setting aside chunks of time where I know I need to be really focused. And then other times, you know, if I'm doing something that doesn't need so much brain power, I can mix it in with other things. So I don't really have a typical day. Although I do really miss working in coffee shops. I miss like being around other people.
There's something about the energy of other people around you, and you have to simultaneously shut it out and focus on what you're doing, and yet you're still aware of it. So how long, and this might not be an apropos question because it sounds like it varies, how long does it take you to write a first draft?
With my very first book, The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street, I did it during National Novel Writing Month, which my husband thought I was totally nuts because my kids were really young, and, you know, I was like so busy already, but I really wanted to do that program, which is every month in November. There's a challenge to do a whole novel of around 50,000 words in the month of November. So if you divide that by 30, 50,000 by 30, it's about 16 to 1,700 words. So that was enormously helpful to me because I think, you know, especially when you're first starting to write, you might just get so bogged down in trying to get everything right and everything to make sense, which that just doesn't happen in a first draft. Like nothing makes sense in the first draft. It's like, if you can just get the bare bones of it out there, it gives you something to work with in the future. At least for me, that's very helpful. So ever since that, I've tried to sort of use that same methodology for the rest of my first drafts. And after 30 days, is it good? No, but it's at least something rather than an empty page, which is what ends up happening if I just nitpick it too much in the beginning. So if I just write those 1,700 words a day, don't go to bed until I finish that word count, and it's torture. It's really, really hard to keep putting out new words, that amount every single day. But I know that at the end, at least I have something to work with rather than getting to chapter 5 and just ruminating on that for weeks and then writing another chapter. It just extends it so much. And for me, it works to write a really sloppy, quick first draft and then work on it and edit.
At what point do you share a work in progress? Do you have any early readers?
Well, for me, I don't share it until I feel like I've gotten it to the best point I can. So I know a lot of people do share earlier drafts, but for me, it feels important to me to not give it to someone unless I feel like I don't know what else to do to make it better. In the early stages, there are a lot of things that still need to be fixed, but at least I know that I've sort of gone through my checklist to make sure that I'm giving them something that I feel like is the best I can do at that time, and then get the feedback and then do that over again and then revise until I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to make it better, and then show it to someone. And I don't really know how my editor works with other authors, but for us, that seems to work well. And she's very much an editor that doesn't micromanage me. So that works well for us too, because she knows I'm giving her my best work, and that that when I get her comments back, I take them very seriously and I rework it. And she doesn't demand anything. She just poses questions like, with this section, can you just take another look at it and see, do you think it's making sense? If I push her to give me more, sometimes she will, but I think she really doesn't want to overstep into telling me what to do, and really letting me work it out, which is sometimes frustrating because sometimes, especially I remember this growing up when I was writing, in middle school and high school, sometimes you just want the teacher to tell you how to fix it and tell you what to do, and then you just fix it and then turn it in and you get an A. But in this case, I think she really respects that creative part where, yes, she could say, do this, it's going to work better. Instead saying, how about you look at this section? I think something's a little off or something like that, rather than fix it my way.
I think that's a really good approach, because sometimes I've had early readers point out something that didn't sit right with them and they have a suggestion, and I'm able to fix it, but taking a different approach.
Yes.
So what she's doing is skipping the suggestion because she's letting you pick the approach you want.
Yes.
Does your family read your books?
Yes, they do.
Oh, so your daughters have read them?
Oh, yeah. They've read them multiple times. I think they've memorized the first one.
Okay, that is an unusual answer. Mostly we hear from authors that nobody in their family reads their books.
Oh, that's so interesting. Usually when it's in first pass pages, so when it's copy edited, all revisions are done, and it's all laid out like it will be in the book, I read out loud the first pass pages because I need to read it out loud anyways to catch those last mistakes, and they're also very good at catching mistakes. So for us, that's the time where I read it out loud to them. And my husband generally reads it at that point too. He used to read them in the earlier stages, but we had to stop because it wasn't good for our marriage. It's just, how it is, where you just want them to be supportive, and they're like, that's the right grammar usage of the semicolon? And you're like, I'm not asking you that question. That's not the point of you reading it. So now he reads it later, although I think he would love to read it in the earlier stages, but I was like, I just need to set some boundaries here.
So have your daughters ever made suggestions for plot points?
They sometimes do. They sometimes ship the characters, They'll like take different characters and see what they would be like in a relationship to each other, which is funny. But I have to say that my younger daughter, she's a huge reader. Well, both of them are, but she's reading like the middle grade genre right now, like just really heavily into that. But she is so funny. She's the best publicist because whenever she's somewhere new, like she started soccer, like a soccer team this past fall, and like she was brand new to a team that was like already established. And she went around asking them if they knew me or if they read the Vanderbeekers book. Have you read the Vanderbeekers book? My mom wrote that. So it was pretty funny. And she's like,
That's so cute.
2 people read your book already. And so it's pretty funny. And then she's like, and the other people didn't read it, but they're going to get it from the library. So it's pretty great. And she wears t-shirts with like the cover of my book on it that my husband made. So it's pretty funny.
Is there a book that you've wanted to write, but obviously you've written the series?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have story ideas for beyond the Vanderbeeker series?
I do. I mean, I think one of the things that is important for me right now, as I'm starting the last Vanderbeekers book, which I've been putting off for months just because it's just been so hectic. And I've just sort of been writing it in my head when I walk the dogs and stuff. But in those moments where I get a lot of rest, I start thinking about new projects. But I think it's hard when I'm under deadlines for a lot of things. Then it just feels like there are other projects that need my attention immediately. So I think maybe after this last Vanderbeekers book, I'm just going to take a little bit of a break and just think about what I want to do next. Because I have thought about different ideas, talked to my agent about them. But it's hard when you're, this year I'm coming out with 2 books. Every other year it's been 1 a year. I know authors that come out with multiple books a year, and then some people come out with 1 book every 5-10 years. And I feel like I'm somewhere in between that. And like 1 book a year is like a little bit on the stressful side for me. Like I think I would like just a tiny bit more time. So I think after I get this next book done, I'm just going to take a little break because it's been a busy schedule for the last 7 years.
Especially when you have kids and then you add the pandemic in and
Yes.
homeschooling and everything. It's been, the last couple of years have been pretty crazy. Would you ever see yourself writing for adults, or is it more middle grade?
Ooh, well, I mean, I love reading books for adults. I don't know. It's hard because when you're a children's book writer, it's like you're sort of not pigeonholed, but you're just sort of like, especially the books I write, which are a little, they're clean, they're family oriented. And then like adult books, it just feels like that would be really different. And then I wouldn't want like young people reading adult books, just because my name was on it, and like, would I have to write under a pen name? I don't know. So it's a lot, but I love children's books. So I don't know. I feel like an adult book feels really daunting. I think it's not off the table, but it doesn't feel like the right time for me right now.
You have a new book coming out in April titled A Duet for Home. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so this book has been on my heart for decades. Right when I finished college, I worked for a transitional housing. It was an organization that provided transitional housing to homeless families with kids. And I worked there for 4 years. And it was an amazing experience for me because I didn't know anything about New York City's shelter system at all. And I especially didn't know how many kids were affected. And getting an eye on that and just realizing how many kids are at risk because of their housing situation really made me feel like, there's something that had to be done about that situation. So I really loved working for them. And part of my work with them was to go into the Bronx shelter once a week and do literacy with the kids in the after school program. And that was wonderful. And there were seeds of a story even back then coming into my mind. I didn't write it back then, but I'd always been thinking about what that story would look like. And that A Duet for Home definitely is the story that's changed the most in the course of me writing it, because I think I started writing it when I wasn't really ready to write that type of story. And I had way too many characters. It was 4 main characters with alternating points of view. And I got feedback about that with some of my writing partners and went down to 3. And then it went down to 2. And then it switched from first person to third person to first person to third person. I would just rewrite the whole thing over and over again. And finally, I showed it to my editor and I went through a lot of changes with her. It took me a while to get it right. I really love the story. I feel like I was able to express a little bit of what it must be like to live in a shelter and to live with that uncertainty, but also living in a place, as a kid where there is some certainty in living in a shelter because you're going to get 3 meals a day. The school bus is going to pick you up. Someone's going to knock on your door if you're not at the school bus on time. You're getting healthcare. You're getting counseling. There are security guards there that watch out for you. So there is certainty and safety in some ways in living in a shelter. That's not always what it is if you're just living with one parent who's juggling trying to get to work and childcare and maybe a newborn and there's just a lot of things. So I tried to pour a lot of that into that story.
That's exciting. I'm sorry, go ahead,
Is it
Karen.
intended for the same age group as the Vanderbeekers?
So the Vanderbeekers, I feel like, can be safely read as young as kids can understand the story. I don't think there are any things that in there that would be something that parents would be concerned about. And I know families that read it when their youngest is 5. And then I have parents who read it when their oldest are 17. So it's definitely a wide range. And then Duet for Home, because they're middle schoolers, they're in 6th grade. So I wouldn't say that 5-year-olds would read it, like probably more middle grade-ish age.
We have some fun extra questions at the end. Are you ready?
Yes.
What is one food that will never get past your lips?
I like to eat so many different types of food, so that really stumped me. I mean, I guess if I was traveling in a certain area where they served, I don't know, meat products that felt strange to me, I might not eat that. But I definitely try to embrace other cultures and their food and I try to be open-minded. So that was a hard question for me.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh, I have no idea. Aquafina? I don't know.
She'd be good.
She's too funny for me. I don't know. She's just too perfect.
What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Oh, my kids and I talk about this a lot. I guess I would really love to communicate with animals. I think that would be really awesome.
What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
I love chocolate, so that probably is a problem. My best friend for my birthday, for Christmas, she sent me a package and she's really on top of things. So she sent it in November. And it was, and she said on the package, I know this is your Christmas present, but feel free to open it in early December because December is a long month. And it was this very long package. It was probably 3 feet long. And so I opened it and it was a huge Cadbury's bar. It was 10 pounds or something. So yeah, I was like, well, that is an amazing present.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
First job I've ever had. Well, probably my very first job when I was 15, I worked in a restaurant and it was just I was too young to advocate for myself or to know employment laws. And so I worked these long hours over the summer at this restaurant. It was not a restaurant. It was more a takeout kind of place that had some seating there. And I would work all these hours, but he wouldn't pay me for all my hours because he said there was so much downtime in the middle of the day where I was just doing schoolwork anyways that it didn't count. And I was like, okay. And he was paying me on their table because I wasn't really technically supposed to work until I was 16. So I felt like I didn't have any way to advocate for myself. I mean, now if my kids went through that, I'd be like, oh no, we are fixing this problem. But back then I had no idea and I had no one to know what was going on. So yeah, that was definitely the worst job.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Probably some kind of healing. I see a lot of, especially with my daughters, they're getting injured all the time, or my older daughter plays violin. She's got a lot of injuries from overuse. So I was thinking about it and I was like, if I had another career, what would it be? And it probably would be some kind of like physical therapy or something to help people heal.
What's your favorite smell?
My favorite smell, probably the smell of baking. I love to bake, so kitchen smells.
You'd enjoy it at my house. My youngest daughter is a baker, and there's always something wonderful, some smell coming from the kitchen.
Oh, nice.
What's the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
Probably publishing a book. I mean, that's like, it is hard because you're putting out something that's so personal to you. And then you get that Amazon review where they're like, this is terrible. So I don't read those anymore. But yeah, it's scary to like put a part of your heart out.
What's one thing you're really bad at?
Probably like sports that require hand-eye coordination. I'm not so good at that. Yeah.
If you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Nope.
I love it. So many people vacillate, but you're like, nope. Hard no.
Decisive. Yep.
Well, this has been so much fun to get to know you. Thank you for being on with us. We really appreciate your time. Good luck with your new release, and we'll look forward to keeping in touch.
Great. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comment section. This has been Behind the Book.